What's up, everybody? Impromptu space here, just waiting for the other co-conspirator to join.
I saw Bitcoin
Yeah, just a
Max.
provocative title.
Yeah, so I
Just
figured I just
just
I
getting them
just
up
hit
early.
I hit join.
Well, yeah, I was hanging out doing a little Telegram chat with John Carvalho, and we were getting kind of riled up, so we figured we would start something. And yeah, this is kind of an open floor if anybody wants to request a speaker. I'm still waiting for John to join though. How's your Monday morning going, MVK?
Not bad. The kids only woke us up around 6. Can you hear one of them here?
Yep, I
Yeah,
can. Yeah,
he's a
sounds like you're
toxic.
really riled
He's
up.
toxic. Yeah.
Looks like John just joined. So, yeah, I don't think there was anything other than inspiring the space than just trying to get some people together. A lot of Twitter carnage this morning. So, much to discuss. John, can you hear us?
Yeah. How you doing?
Good, man. Yeah, excited to have you. We've been talking about catching up for a while. I'm not sure how you wanted to kick this one off, but it's good to see you.
Good to see you too. Always fun to talk with you about maximalism and Bitcoin and its history, which you're someone that I know has been researching and focusing on this corner of Bitcoin for a while. It's funny today. I actually, somebody shared Matt Corallo's tweet in our Slack, and I was like, oh, I'm just going to stay out of it because I'm really happy working with LDK, and it's like everything is going great, and I don't want to disrupt anything, and I think that like all I can do is like disagree, and there's never really like a great, very good feeling outcome when people are just gonna go into something knowing they disagree.
Well, it's kind of
Um,
weird right now because I don't really understand. Like, so my history. I mean, I certainly was not in the maximalist camp. I mean, you're someone who kind of helps encourage my thinking, towards that line of thinking. But it's sort of confusing to me because I don't understand like what's changed, like what would inspire kind of Matt to make that take, right? Like, so being sort of sympathetic to a more pluralist ideology, right? Matt, obviously, someone who kind of maybe helped foster maximalism or, kind of was in that mindset originally. You sort of look at the tweets now and it's sort of, what's changed actually about the ideology, right? Like it seems to be right now that most of the battle is really about sentiment and it's about like what the word Bitcoin maximalist like even means. Because you'd have to imagine that Matt Corral probably still agrees that Bitcoin maximalism is important, or at least the idea that building on Bitcoin is important and advancing Bitcoin is important. So then it sort of results in this whole like it just gets really fuzzy from there.
yeah, so a couple of things. Like, yeah, if you look at, if people putting their money where their mouth is, Matt is working on Bitcoin. He's working, on Bitcoin for a long time, and I don't really know of him working on other things. But honestly, I don't know his long-term stance on maximalism or anything. This is just a tweet I saw today. So I don't really know too much about Matt's political views on Bitcoin or this kind of thing. I will offer a random bit of trivia. Matt actually made a service called CoinGen
Oh yeah,
back in 2013, I think. 2012, 2013, which made it really easy for people to make their own altcoins. Back they weren't shitcoins yet back then; they were altcoins. And so, yeah, I don't know. Maybe he's partially responsible for the growth of the origination of the altcoin industry in this very subtle way. But that is part. So he has always been at least a little bit pluralist because he helped people make altcoins and other blockchains, since early days. I don't know of him ever actually like supporting any of them or anything like that. But what I wanted to get to was I'm trying to figure out, and you saw some tweets from me, like what the actual motivation is here. When it's somebody like Udi, I think the motivation is just, it used to be that like he had friends that were shitcoiners, and he wanted to see them being treated more humanely by non-shitcoiners, by Bitcoiners. And I think maybe there's a little bit of that with Matt. I'm guessing because the tone or the angle, the perspective of his tweets, they don't really like pinpoint what exactly we're supposed to do and what
Right. Yeah.
exactly is wrong. So like I don't really know what to do with it because
Right.
I'm rational. I can explain myself. I'm not. I am aggressive. I'm not always very nice about my views,
Well, I
but
think
like
the other
it's
part of
nothing
it is that
crazy.
Bitcoin maximalism by nature is antagonistic to the crypto system, and I think it has to be. And this is something that I guess I've been trying to like think about because I've been trying to like actually define Bitcoin maximalism and trying to kind of write out like, okay, what are the tenets and what are the underlying beliefs? And I think like one of them has to be that in order to be a Bitcoin maximalist, you have to believe that whatever is going on in the cryptocurrency system at large, that it would be better for that stuff to be on Bitcoin, right? That has to be like somewhat what you believe. So then Bitcoin maximalism is antagonistic to the crypto
It's
space, and it
not for
actually
me, for what it's worth. That's not how I would
why
define
do
it.
you say that?
Because it's not about what's on Bitcoin. That's part of the narrative. That's part of the lie. There's nothing that needs to be on Bitcoin. Bitcoin is an abstraction for value. That's all it is. It's just accounts and scores. You can't do anything else other than Bitcoin than spend it. And so a Bitcoin is just a way of having accounts and having scores that are allocated to those accounts, and basically the most, abstracted, simple rule set for maintaining the score. It's like the blockchain is the referee and the players have scores, and the only way you can get points is if somebody else gives them to you. So you have to
John,
convince them. That's it.
but that's part of the reason why all the shitcoins came about is because people want to do other things than just keeping track of value, right? And they just can't accept that you have this network that is sort of the most strongly secured network with the most amount of economic value on it that only does that. So they try to build
But
other
then I guess
things.
how do we square like the attempts to like put stable coins on Lightning or
Well,
to
the
do
thing
sort of
is,
like tokens
right?
on
So,
Lightning, right? Because like
but hang on.
That's something John's doing, right?
Yeah, so the issue is like there is all the affinity scamming, right? That's essentially how Ethereum was born. Aside from completely ripping off Namecoin and colored coins, um, you have this affinity scamming that rubs in my view like all the Bitcoiners, right? Because you have these people saying, oh look, I have this network that's better than Bitcoin, and then Bitcoin maximalists, toxic maximalists, need to go and point out, no, that's not true. Look, it doesn't do all these other things, and it doesn't scale, and it has all these other problems, right? And it seems that, and these guys have always been on the offensive against Bitcoin. That is, either lobbying for Bitcoin to have issues, or trying to convince people. I mean, XRP used to like camp in front of TD Bank to try to convince that Bitcoin is for drugs. Um, and when shitcoiners see a handful of Bitcoiners sort of go on the offensive and asking the SEC to go, I don't agree with that, but going after get the SEC to go after their shitcoins, which are securities by definition. They all lose their minds because they're just simply not used to having Bitcoin have a concerted effort, even if it's by a small group, to try to take down this other stuff.
So we jumped around a bit. I would say the mistake is to think of Bitcoin as more than how I described it. If you frame it as this very simple game with very simple rules, being the most minimal and abstract as possible, it makes things much easier to understand as you apply other potential or proposed use cases. Like Bitcoin is not a network in the sense that all the things you can do with networks could be done on Bitcoin. It's not a database in the sense that all the things that you could do with databases could be done on Bitcoin. This is the shitcoin narrative. This is the mistake. Bitcoin needs to be as simple and as streamlined as possible so it can scale, because it actually is designed not to scale. It's maximally redundant. And so because of this, the more you put in it, the more likely it is to break. It'll break either because it requires censorship and centralization, or because of complexity and too much compute. Like it just, you cannot keep putting things in there because the design is so delicate and so specific of a purpose and meant to be simple. And so this narrative that, like, for example, one of the popular ones is Bitcoiners are ignorant and unimaginative because they don't appreciate all of the tech advancements that are happening on shitcoins. But the problem with this is you have to suspend reality to entertain these advancements. You have to say, okay, let's enter the shitcoin simulation where the problems with making the database more complicated and making the smart contracting and everything more centralized, where we suspend those problems and pretend they don't exist, and now see what's possible. Wow, imagine. But all you're doing is saying, wow, what's possible in a simulation? Well, what's possible in a simulation? Literally anything. Like you can make an entire 3D video game world. You can do anything you want to in a simulation. That's what shitcoiners are proposing. But you cannot do anything you want to on Bitcoin.
Well, I mean, ultimately, it's because they're not bound by physics, right? There is no real proof of work in any of those systems of any merit. So if you're not bound by physics, it's therefore your simulation idea where they can do whatever they want. There is no cost to their stupidity, right? There is no cost to making those claims.
Well, there's no cost as long as ignorant people are funding it. And that's the problem and why Bitcoiners are like Bitcoiners don't even need to be very smart or very well researched to be correct. That's what's so
Yeah,
frustrating
I
to them.
honestly think that that's
It's
a
like,
huge point. Yeah, I wrote like a tweet this morning that I never didn't send. It was like, like broke, that like being ignorant in the regular economy is bad, and then like Bitcoin protects, by nature you can be somewhat ignorant in the Bitcoin economy and still
Well,
benefit
that's
from
a
the system.
feature of money, right? I
Right.
mean,
Yeah.
you don't call some ogre, the Middle Ages with an axe running around ignorant for having gold in his sash, right? I mean, like that's the total feature of it. You shouldn't have a PhD in economics to be able to save, right? So you just
Right.
buy that Bitcoin, you store it away from a computer, and you should be good forever, right? That is the promise.
Well,
So
I want to like go back to what John you were saying, because I think you had a good rant back there. But so I mean, so if you don't like, so you don't like the terminology of like, okay, we got to build the stuff back on Bitcoin, but you're still kind of working on technology that would port stablecoin stuff, or not port, it would recreate U.S. dollar backed or back stuff within the Bitcoin ecosystem. So then how does that square with maximalism in that case?
so first of all, we're not building anything on Bitcoin. And even when it comes to stablecoin stuff, we're not the ones building that technology either. We are researching and implementing various options for enabling basically token functionality without using a shitcoin. Now, whether that should be done on Omni or OmniBolt or on Taro or whatever, that remains for us to reveal and decide on. But as of now, we have never ourselves created any special technology for using tokens. We have only basically funded research or implemented other people's research, and that's the case. So
But how does that even square? Because like most people, I think, are just against tokens, or even you saw this with the Lightning backed. You're doing U.S. dollar backed stuff on Lightning, where people didn't understand how that works. So like, what?
sure, it's pretty easy. There's Bitcoin and there's credit. There's nothing else. And so you have Bitcoin as an abstracted digital asset, which can represent anything the two people transacting it want it to. It doesn't have to be, it can represent secret membership to a club. It can represent anything you want. Nobody actually knows what is happening in a transaction when they see a transaction on the blockchain, only that they've paid enough fee to convince a miner to include it and that it followed the rules. And so anything else is credit. Anything else is basically some sort of other promise from an issuer, and that includes shitcoins. And so basically, the shitcoiners make these promises, and then the people that buy into them hope they can redeem on those promises. But Bitcoin doesn't make any promises. Bitcoin is just rules that we all mutually enforce. And so you have credit, and credit is basically based on trust. It's a way to leverage cooperation of humans in order to achieve efficiencies. And what are like great examples of credit? Like gift cards. That's a pretty simple one. Just the ability to, say, hey, if you give me money up front for these coffees, I will give you a discount, or you can use this instrument and you can give it as a gift to your mom on Christmas, and she can come back and redeem it for a coffee. And you say, okay, that's convenient. I see a utility there. If I trust Starbucks to still exist and to render, the amount due of this IOU when my mom goes, then I can achieve this utility by trusting. And that's what credit is. And there are different forms of credit, but that's like the basic, primitive of it is I make a claim as to what you can redeem, and I give you a price and you buy that claim. And now you are the holder of that claim, and you just have to prove that claim in order to redeem it. Now, the interesting thing about doing this with a blockchain is that the real quality that we're trying to distill here is that Bitcoin is the first time we've had digital bearer instruments. And digital bearer instruments means like the difference would be with a gift card, what's actually on the gift card is the private key. It is the password, right? So anybody who sees it can redeem it. So thus you can't have a secondary market. You can't have a trusted marketplace. Everybody always has to trust the previous buyer not to redeem it before they do. And that's the problem with credit right now, is that you either have to go and treat the central authority of the issuer as the only way to settle changes. Like you can say, hey, issuer, I don't want this credit anymore. Can you reissue it to somebody else? And they either refund you or they do what you say. But there's no way to manage credit without involving the issuer as an authority. Now, with a digital bearer instrument, if you can do this without that, then people can have aftermarkets and people can accept credit from places that didn't issue it. And for example, I could go to Dunkin' Donuts and redeem my Starbucks coffee token for a coffee if Dunkin' Donuts wanted to accept it, because there would be an order book for Starbucks tokens where I could sell those tokens into that marketplace if I wanted to. And I wouldn't have to rely on Starbucks to provide that marketplace. So you can have a whole basically independent economy, and you can basically tokenize any type of credit and have secondary markets for it that do not require like every single issuer to be involved with those marketplaces. And this is a good way to get around censorship problems. This is a good way to allow people to coordinate and create their own marketplaces. It's a good way to be able to resell and repurchase credit back as an issuer, which is another thing you can't do. If I give you a password, a gift card, and I sell it to you, I can't really buy it back from you, because you may have made that promise to somebody else, and that might cause me customer service issues, etc. So it's the whole idea of a digital bearer instrument is what makes credit interesting. Now, do you need a blockchain to do this? Is there a better way to do it? Should we just use databases and just deal with the central authority aspect, since it's not that much different if you really think about it? These are all up for debate, but that is where my area of interest is. It's not in that I think that there's abstracted competing monies that could be created with tokens. It's that I think that credit will always be something useful to society.
Well, don't you feel like, I mean, it seems like a part of the opposition to Bitcoin maximals right now is they're sort of trying to paint this idea that Bitcoin is against credit, right? Like, I mean, I think that's like come up in some of the pieces that I've read and sort of the arguments that I've read.
Bitcoin is not against anything. Bitcoin is Bitcoin. It doesn't have thoughts. I don't know what you mean.
Well, I mean, again, that's what I'm just sort of bouncing arguments that are out there in the market off you, because I think that's, the first time that I've heard, the discussion of credit, like within Bitcoin, being something that can be done operationally within Bitcoin, and that might be sort of a maximalist kind of take.
Well, the main issue is the difference between circular credit, right, and other forms of credit, where what a lot of these token or other chains are trying to do is just recreate the fiat system, right, where they essentially can just create more credit out of thin air, create more tokens or more asset issuance, right, without any control or any predictability or anything really. While Bitcoin is the total opposite of that. The whole purpose of it is to have predictability on how the issuance happens, and not by doing that, not creating credit.
Well, Bitcoin offers predictability of supply of the total issuance, and credit is basically a way to lean on trust. So Bitcoin is not going to cure trust or cure violence or cure a lot of the things people want it to. Maybe eventually by realigning incentives, it will mitigate some of those things. But just in general, it fixes the idea of a store of value as a bearer instrument in the abstract. And so if you want a money that doesn't have a promise attached to it, that is like the most, saleable across any means, then Bitcoin is going to be what you want. But if you have some kind of promise that you want to attach to Bitcoin, well, now you have the cost of Bitcoin plus the cost of your promise, and that's very impractical. So the idea here is to separate out credit instruments as being their own promises, and using, you know, a technology either similar to Bitcoin or on Bitcoin, or on side chain or on, although I should say I don't really believe in side chains. Or, you know, for example, like with Taro has like a separate kind of tracking system for these credits, and is trying to use, you know, Lightning as a way to coordinate transfer of these credits. But there's no such thing as tokens on Lightning per se. They all have to be on some other way of database, either external to the blockchain or literally on the blockchain.
Can you break that down for a little bit? Because I do think that part of the, you know, frustration against, you know, you kind of toyed around with it, like modern Bitcoin maximalism, or like, you know, the new school of Bitcoin maximalists, is like, it does seem like there's this idea. I don't know. I feel like we've spent so long, kind of as a culture and community, sort of demonizing anything else that wasn't on Bitcoin. I think, you know, what I noticed from some of the newer people who joined Bitcoin recently is that when you try to abstract these ideas, they become a little bit hesitant to it. So, I mean, we are talking about tokenization on Bitcoin right now, right? That's what we're talking about, right?
Well, we're talking about digital bearer instruments and, you know, the abstract version of blockchain, a Bitcoin, versus a trusted version that has a promise attached to it. And so it is what is up for debate is what is the best format to do that. You know, for example, Blockstream will tell you that it's liquid, that it's a sidechain. They say make an additional blockchain, much like a shitcoin, but have this one intentionally run by a federation. Lightning Labs will tell you that you should use a Merkle sum tree using Taproot and manage these in universes and coordinate the transactions over the Lightning Network. You know, Omni and OmniBolt will tell you just put it in the op return and have an encoding, you know, process for encoding data into the op return and just use it as a layer on Bitcoin without a separate blockchain either, without a separate database. So there's more than one way to approach it, and there will be more ways in the future. This is another thing people should keep in mind: is we know there's always new designs that come up and new mutations, and there's always new ways to do things. So I don't think that we can really say which one is the winner until one of them wins, and especially when you consider that the main winner right now is on shitcoins. But the issue here is, you know, tokens on shitcoins, these shitcoins do not scale well at all, and they take things to extremes, like by doing things like NFTs. NFTs will break any blockchain at scale. It's an impossibly retarded idea, and so you see this kind of chain hopping happen, which is just like this moving of the scam of the hot potato. So it's like Ethereum gets bloated because it's too many DeFi's and too many NFTs and too many tokens, and then people move on to Tron. And then if Tron gets to be really popular, they move on to Solana, et cetera. And you just have to keep on getting more centralization to be able to accommodate the scale. And it just basically becomes the equivalent of just using a database in the first place.
But isn't it the power of Bitcoin, and the reason why, like, true Bitcoin maximalism, I think, should be rooted in some type of technical know-how. Like, having just Bitcoin maximalism just because people are speaking talking points and all those kind of things, those are the people I call yellow belt maxis. But when you get to a point where you understand, like you guys are talking about, what's really going on, you'll understand why people are Bitcoin maximalists. The problem is that when you're talking about issuers, isn't it kind of crazy that we are like talking about, okay, can we have a digital bearer assets outside the issuer? Because a lot of times the issuer is the last means of enforcement, or the last person that can actually like treat it as valid, treat the asset as valid, because you have to do something with it. Like you were talking about Starbucks. At the end of the day, if Starbucks put this on some type of decentralized system, their points of decentralized system, they can still tell people at the store that they're not going to accept them. You see what I'm saying? And so
Yeah, of course, but that's why
why do
it's
we even need?
trust.
So why do that's what I'm saying? So that's what I'm saying. Why do we even need that? That's the part I'm saying. The thing about Bitcoin
Why do
is
we need trust?
no. Why do we need a system? Why do we need to decentralize a system that is already being pushed out by a centralized issuer? Like, there's no reason for it. You just might as well use the database at that point. My thing is that Bitcoin, because the issuer and the code and everything is all within itself, and it's already compartmentalized into a system that allows us to then, like, basically establish the trust based code. I don't think
So
I don't think we need a lot of stuff built on Bitcoin. I talk about building things for Bitcoin more than I say building on Bitcoin. I don't think that's a
Lamar, so I've been saying this for a while. The problem is like how the whole narrative around like the tokenization of things was constructed early days. The thing is, there is a huge demand for people to decentrally trade tokens or or shares on a company, or credits from Starbucks. People want to trade those things outside of central controlled like gift card selling companies, or outside of essentially the purviews of regulators, right? The problem is there's a difference here. The assets themselves, right? The issuer of the assets themselves is often centralized. Well, pretty much all of them are. So you need to separate those two things. The asset issuance is centralized, but people want to decentrally trade those assets. And that's why there's so much demand for some of the features that some of these other chains offer, because people do get to trade those assets decentrally.
I guess my only issue is this though, NBK, is that because I remember we did NFTs or account receivables on top of Bitcoin a long time ago. But one of the things you start to realize is if you try to tokenize accounts receivable and securitize those in a token form, then what could happen is that somebody issues one account receivable on, say, like they issue it on Bitcoin. Then they issue the same exact account receivable on Ethereum. Then they issue the same exact receivable on, I guess now, Solana, right? So they issue these receivables in 3 different places. When it comes time to say who actually owns it, how do you have to like resolve that dispute? And the only way you wind up doing it is in the court. So at the end of the day, the issuer should have just did it themselves, centralized, because at the end of the day, when it's time to have a dispute, you still gonna go back to the court system to make sure you resolve it. So that's what makes Bitcoin so beautiful, right? There's no court needed to resolve any disputes because the system already works so that you know who owns what at what time. And
Yeah, but you got it a little bit
there's no other issue
backwards.
on it.
The idea here is trust useful, and I could portray this to you as: do you think gift cards are useful, just in general? Yes or no?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so if gift cards are useful, you think credit is useful, right?
I mean, of course. Here's the thing: credit's gonna
No,
always be
let me
useful
finish.
as long as
I'm
people enjoy
building
it.
up
Go
to
ahead.
something here. I'm
Yeah,
building
go
up
ahead.
to something here. So, like, you think credit is useful generally as a premise. Now, do you think it would be useful to be able to sell your gift card to somebody else?
I said, yep, of course, sure.
Okay. Now, do you think it would be useful to be able to buy a gift card from somebody else without having to worry about them selling it before you could, spending it before you could?
But again, that's what I'm saying though. So like, think about it. I buy your gift card, right, John? Let's talk it through. I buy your gift card. Then I go to Starbucks and Starbucks says we discontinued that gift card. So even no matter what we did,
You
decentralized,
can't. It's not. But these aren't gift cards. They're bearer instruments. They're tokens. They're all the same.
no, but what I'm saying, but again, no, but that's what I'm saying. But Starbucks they do it now. They cut certain gift cards off if they have
Right,
been
but
known to be
that's
fraudulent.
not how it works. These aren't unique gift cards. They're unique owners. And so if Starbucks wants to block it, they would have to be blocking it because of who the owner was, who was trying to redeem it. And the only way they could know that is if they were KYCing everybody that was redeeming. And this is not generally how credit tokens work or gift cards. And so, yes, these things could end up this way because of regulators or such. I have no idea. We don't live in this world yet. But the gift token that you're trying to redeem doesn't say who should own it on it. It's not a unique serial number. It is actually an abstracted token that gets passed from one UTXO to another. So this is not it doesn't work quite the way you think, in the sense that what's useful here is all the tokens are the same. It's just a matter of what their blockchain history is. And I do feel like first we're getting a
You're
little
talking
off
about
topic.
like you're talking about from a fungible standpoint, right? You're saying, okay, if all of these tokens are fungible, then just like how Bitcoin, like, is that what you're saying?
There's no
Like
such thing
Bitcoin is
as
basically,
fungible. Fungible is a nonsense concept.
It's sellability.
yeah, that's what I'm saying, John. Like at the end of the day, whoever issued it is the one that's going wherever you need to redeem it. They're the ones that's going to have the control over it. They could literally say to this token, like real talk. Like I don't
Yes,
understand.
that's the trust. That's the trust. If it's a trusted thing, you have to trust that they will redeem it when you want it to redeem. But it won't be not redeemed just because it is a token. It's going to be not redeemed because of either they don't want to do business with you or because something happened, that token was stolen and they deleted it. There's still all the risks of a centrally issued trusted thing, but you have added qualities to it where you can have an aftermarket of people passing it back and forth without involving the issuer.
Well, that's the whole point, right? That I was talking about. There is this huge demand for people to trade these tokens outside of the purview of the issuer, and also of some exchange where they can be prevented from doing so. right? That's the value that I see on these other chains. And maybe that's what Terra results, right? It's like a way for people to trade those things. I don't know.
But how
But
do
the
you but how do
demand
you
is there,
stop
and
the
the demand is not going away.
but how do you stop the duplication of those assets, right? Like if it's a security in a company and I put them on 4 different chains, how do you stop that, MBK?
Well, you can't prevent a centralized entity or even semi-decentralized entity from issuing more tokens. You can prevent the same token from being the same if they have some reasonably okay system of issuance, right? So if they're using Bitcoin as a way to peg their thing, or essentially, or at least
This
maintain
is
count. Go
how do
ahead.
you prevent Starbucks from issuing more gift cards than they can
You
redeem?
don't.
It's the same
No,
thing.
you
Like,
don't.
it has nothing to do
No,
with
but
it.
that's the whole thing, John. If you have a security and there's some type of real asset that
A
is fact.
centralized database can't prove that either.
But what I'm saying is at the end of the day, you just said trust. And whenever you get to a level of trust, then why are you not just trusting the person that's issuing it? At that
Because
point,
it's
why
about
would
not
you trust them?
trusting the counterparty. Not everybody has to trust the
Exactly.
issuer. Nobody's arguing that. We're talking about removing trust from counterparties.
Yes,
So
it just keeps on going back to this, Lamar.
yeah, go
There's a
ahead.
difference, okay, between trusting the issuer and trusting the counterparty selling it to you. People want to be able to trade these assets between each other, okay, without a centralized entity and without the issuer allowing them to trade those assets. It's very similar to, for example, miles, right? Before, you could trade credit card miles with each other, and people used to do this on forums, right? But then they clamped down on that. Now with gift cards are extremely salable, and they seem to not been able to get to prevent people from trading them. That's why gift cards have all kinds of KYC and limits on the size of them,
There
because
we go.
they're so easy to trade with each other. And Starbucks will likely be good for the gift card because there is that trust with that. It doesn't make it useless. It is a useful system.
No, but that's what I'm saying. You're making the point of what I'm basically saying is that when it comes down to the very base of it, even if we're trading something back and forth, I don't know if Starbucks has said we're not going to take this token anymore. I don't know that till I go and try to redeem it.
All
But
right,
I've
but
traded it. I've traded it 50 times. So now,
we're
so
talking way
how
too
do I
much about tokens. This is
how do
just
I
about Bitcoin
Yeah, well, I guess
maximalism.
I wanted to get. I mean, maybe
how
we
do
can
I
tie it
establish
together
value?
here. It's like, why is this a maximalist conversation? Like, why? Like, because obviously, like, we're dealing now with like different concepts. Like, what about this kind of relates back to that?
Well, I
Right.
would say that it's that some people think maximalism means that you just don't believe in any other value in any other thing as an abstraction. And this is this would be going too ignorant as far as being a Bitcoin maximalist and just believing that basically all credit, all stores of value are shitcoins. Gold is a shitcoin, fiat's a shitcoin, everything's a shitcoin. No, they all have different risks and they all have different utilities. But shitcoins are literally like evil because they are all inflationary on top. They're just more Bitcoins. They're more inflation. And they're also all centralized. So they're trying to use blockchain as a technology, as a scapegoat to pretend that they're decentralized when they're not. Credit and tokens have nothing to do with pretending to be decentralized. It's just recognizing that as another form, another tool for transacting between humans in an economy, credit will always be useful. And there's no way you can get around that. People will want loans. People will want to be able to scale their businesses faster than the amount of revenue that they can make. And they will use credit in various ways to achieve this. And they will establish credit in various ways in order to do so. So I think that the topic relating to maximalism is just simply that Bitcoin is the best store of value in the abstract, but that we do have to accept that there are going to be other ways that are reasonable and rational to store value in, but that shitcoins aren't really one of them.
But
But
isn't it about ultimately like building or bringing that functionality to the Bitcoin economy, and then also understanding that there's limitation on that today, right?
not
Like,
necessarily. I mean, if their claim is that they're like, super ultra hard money was a narrative that Ethereum was trying to push for a while, right? I mean, these guys are trying to compete Bitcoin and Bitcoin's core functions, right? And Gresham laws will show to them that people will dump their other crap before Bitcoin because Bitcoin is better. I would argue too that gold is a shitcoin. It became a shitcoin in modern world because it does not serve any of its purposes anymore. And
Well, paper gold maybe is a shitcoin. This would be another
but that's
conversation. But
that's
gold is
but there was a
an
fall.
element.
No,
It's not a shitcoin. It's a metal.
no, yeah, well, it's a shit coin for store of value, right? I use gold all the time in industry, but it's not good anymore as a store of value. I mean, so much so I haven't even kept up with inflation. But the issue is MMT was able to sort of find a backdoor into gold because gold is not divisible, not transportable, right? So the way the markets went around gold is by creating a bunch of fake gold, right? And there is no solution to that. Is that gold is essentially a dying thing as a store of value because of that. So in my view, that's a shitcoin because it's trying to claim
It's a
it is
very
a good store of
sophisticated
value
definition
where
that
it
I don't
isn't.
know is like widely shared.
No, but like, listen, like at least in my view, the way I see shitcoins is, do they make a claim that they can back, right? And they can't. Like most of the time, they're just affinity scamming Bitcoin. They're saying that they can do certain things where they can't in order to get that the early stage adoption of essentially idiots that want to lose their money.
Yeah, I just don't know if tokens and even the credit, right, needs a blockchain. That's the whole thing. That's my biggest thing.
Well, I
It's
guess
like,
I wanted to get back to like what
why do
John
you
was
need that?
saying about like, there's different approaches that Bitcoin is taking to doing more. Let's just couch it at that so we don't get into immediate
I
infighting.
want to kind of sew it up with one other way to look at it, which is, first of all, if you don't like it, don't use it. If you don't trust it, don't use it. Nobody's going to force you. But even worse for your argument is you won't know the difference if people are doing it or not, and you can't stop the difference. And that's kind of the whole point here, is because Bitcoin is abstracted and there's no like exchange price on Bitcoin. There's no transactions in Bitcoin. There's no tit for tat in Bitcoin. There's only you submitting a change to the database and proving that you are authorized to make that change to reassign tokens to a Bitcoin, units to a new address. And that's all it does. And when you do that, you can attach anything you want external to it. For example, the Omni layer and Omni token, the Omni layer as a token layer, you can put encoded information in the operturn. And there's nothing that you can do where you can know for sure. If somebody makes their own layer and has their own decoding method, you will have no idea that they're doing gift cards on the
But
blockchain.
John, hang on a second. This doesn't live in an abstract, right? Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is traded, it has essentially economical purpose. Your trading of that omni layer stuff, right, or whatever thing you want to do with this with this system is still bound by all these economic concerns, right? So, for example, if Bitcoin price is rallying up and the retail is coming in, the fees on this chain will go up a lot, and your other purposes may not be able to survive this new economic reality.
I agree with the last sentence only. It is true that any alternative use case may not be able to keep up with the ultimate value of an abstracted Bitcoin transaction, but the rest of it doesn't really hold because you don't know for sure why fees are going up and whether they will be relieved and what they will be relieved by. And just because the price of Bitcoin is going up does not necessarily mean that the price of
That was
fees
just an
will go up
example. It could
proportionally.
be the price. It could be the price going down, and everybody wanting to rushly take their Bitcoin to Coinbase to dump it. Like
Well, and
the
there's also a
point.
lot of ways to
Right.
batch things like this to make them practical. So it's hard to say when an abstracted use case will die. Other
But
than
my
that,
point is this,
if
right?
it could eventually become true, that is a risk.
Yeah, sure. But my point is, Bitcoin, as much as you are correct in saying that Bitcoin is just this ledger system, right, to maintain a record of ownership, its main purpose, as intended and as described on the paper, is to create a new monetary system, right? And if you try to stick in to Bitcoin other purposes, they may or may not be at risk of not functioning in the future, right? Because who knows? Maybe Bitcoin even has a change in the future that is, on the protocol layer, just so that the monetary problem shows up that might
Well, for
kill all these
example,
other projects too. It's not a straw man
let's
argument. I'm just
converge the
saying.
operturns.
I'm just trying to say that the point is, Well, who knows? Maybe we remove op returns in the future because we need to save space on the blocks, right? I don't know. But what I'm trying to say is the purpose of Bitcoin is monetary, right? So everything else in Bitcoin serves serves in the to the purpose of making that happen, right? The proof of work, everything in Bitcoin just tries to defend its monetary properties. So trying to do any other thing with Bitcoin, it's cool. I support it. I think it's awesome. But it's important to understand that all those things may be killed by just Bitcoin's sort of normal economic dynamics.
So this is going to get hairy, but I can't resist. Technically, that's not all exactly true. So while we all recognize Bitcoin as money and it being the most useful purpose for it, Bitcoin doesn't know anything about money. It is not actually money. It is not actually a monetary system. It is literally just a way for a bunch of nodes to reach consensus on a shared history of accounts and scores. There's no dollars in Bitcoin.
So you're saying that there
There's
is
no.
no
Let me
economic,
finish. There's
yeah,
no
but
enforced value of a Bitcoin. It could go to zero, and everybody could still keep using it for some other
no
purpose.
other monetary system does that either, aside from fiat.
Well, no monetary system can guarantee anything. That's what credit does. Credit gives guarantees.
Yes, Bitcoin is
But
not a credit system.
But John, how
right,
can one Bitcoin go to zero? That's the crazy part. Like you're still matching it against fiat. You see what
John,
I'm saying? Like,
without the monetary properties of Bitcoin and
right.
the trading of Bitcoin and the marginal cost of a Bitcoin, you have no Bitcoin security, right? Nobody would mine Bitcoin if it wasn't for Bitcoin's monetary properties that do
but you
pay
could
them.
easily. So the reason why you have to separate these ideas is there is no dollars. It's about buying power, right? And now, if the most valuable thing, the most saleable thing is not Bitcoin in the future, but say it is, I don't know, bananas, and everybody's using banana tokens, and they're using Bitcoin to transfer massive amounts of banana tokens at one time. The costs can be related. In other words, the utility of what Bitcoin is providing as a settlement mechanism could be less than the amount of value inside of it. And so people could
Yeah,
use Bitcoin for an alternative purpose if they really wanted to.
you can't separate things in Bitcoin. Every single aspect of it has an economic consequence on the other, right? Bitcoin does not exist secured as it is as a ledger for you to do other things on it if it was not for Bitcoin's monetary properties and store of value properties,
I'm
where
always going to have
Bitcoin
to
is
pay the
secured.
cost of the fees and whatever the going rate is for those fees. But I can use Bitcoin however I want, and you have no
Yes, you
idea
can,
how
but
I'm
you
using
cannot
it.
say that Bitcoin is not for monetary purposes. Bitcoin's main purpose is monetary, and that is what secured the network.
I mean, it's scores. If you want to call scores money, then we can have a stupid conversation about what money is. I would really rather not.
But you can call it whatever you want. The point is, without Bitcoin being used as a monetary means or a store of value means, there is no security.
Okay, but store of value and money are not the same thing. And I really don't want to
I
have the money
agree.
conversation. I would rather just prefer to change the
But
subject, honestly.
you cannot have a conversation about Bitcoin unless you have somewhat of a money conversation, because otherwise Bitcoin doesn't exist.
Of course it exists. It's a store. I explained what it is. It's a scoring system for accounts
But
for everybody to play
John,
in the same game.
the scoring system is only one aspect of it. What keeps the scoring system working is the economic dynamics of mining. Without those economic
Proof
dynamics,
of work
there's no
keeps it working.
security.
That's
You
all.
know, Excel is a scoring system.
No, it is not. It is a database format.
Yeah, Bitcoin is the same. It's just a Merkle tree. The thing that keeps it secured is the economic dynamics.
No, the thing that keeps it secured is the difficulty algorithm.
Which is
Which,
ruled by
right,
the,
economic
you know, what?
was ruled
Without,
by the monetary economics.
if you don't have those economic dynamics, okay, you don't have the difficulty adjustment, okay, and you don't have Bitcoin security.
The only economics is supply and demand. That's it.
And that is what rules an asset in economic value.
I honestly don't know what we're talking about anymore. I joined this conversation to talk about Bitcoin maximalism and about attacks on it, not to argue about what the definition of money is or whether credit is useful.
Well, but you get exactly to the point of Bitcoin maximalism, right? Like you could say that a lot of the maximalists are people who will make a point about Bitcoin being this monetary tool, right? For store of value, minimum of exchange.
Yeah, but the point of Bitcoin maximalism isn't that Bitcoin can be used as money. Anything, literally anything in quantity can be used as
That
money.
is not what
It
I
becomes,
said.
what is the difference in quality? What is the difference in quality? And why do we think shitcoins are scams? And why do we think shitcoins are scammers? And why is there this small trend of people who are
Right.
in between that want to demonize maximalists?
Because they make false claims about their coins being able to do what Bitcoin does.
Okay, but Ryan Gentry from Lightning Labs, who is teaming up on this argument, and Matt Corallo from LDK do not promote
But
shitcoins, and they don't
Matt,
have
so
shitcoins to
I don't want to
sell.
speak for
So why do
Matt.
they hate
So I don't want to speak
maximalists?
for Matt, but Matt appreciates more compromising ways of doing the network, so much so that he wanted 2x, right, on Bitcoin. So, if you follow that trend.
Yeah, but now we're just like arguing about like, I mean, we have to be able to have this conversation without getting into like historical
No,
revisionism
it's
and
it's
finger
not
pointing. Like
historical
otherwise there's no
revisionism,
point.
right?
It is. I mean, it is. I mean, I've made the same argument before. I mean, you can't like I mean, this is why the whole myth of the block size wars being something that developers want is like one of the most poisonous like things in the space. Like that was like never an
But
accurate way to
but
look at it.
Rizzo,
They all had diverse opinions.
you have to put things in context, right? And the context is some people are more willing to make compromises on the base layer, right? And that's just the way that they think and the way that they want to sort of pursue features for Bitcoin. And you have the people who are extremely conservative about the base layer, and they will sort of fight tooth and nail to do that. But they will also project those beliefs in other projects too, right? You find that most people that want these things, they'll call other project scams or whatever because they don't have those properties.
Well, right. That's what's confusing to people is, you have these people who are presumably in the Bitcoin only camp, right? Where they're working on Bitcoin only and presumably see the most value in Bitcoin, and they're making arguments against maximalism. So then the conversation then becomes like, okay, well, what then is maximalism, and what is it trying to do, and what is it trying to achieve? And like, why are these people opposed? Why are some people opposed to it? Like, right? What are the specific reasons? Otherwise, I think we're just like debating people's feelings about the term.
I honestly think that's all it actually is. I think that I'd have to reread Matt Corallo's thread to be like, have a lot of conviction about what I'm about to say. But my general hunch is this: these are people sometimes like Ryan and Matt that have friends that believe in shitcoins, and their friends make reasonable sort of perspectives about why they like these shitcoins, and the best equivocation that they can make to justify staying friends with gullible people is that there's the tech. It's like, oh, they're doing interesting things that Bitcoin is not doing, and Bitcoiners don't appreciate that. And maximalists are the kind of flag bearer of this lack of appreciation. And so when these guys talk to their shitcoiner friends, their Ethereum friends, whoever, and they're talking about like programmers that they actually like as people, they're thinking, oh, all right, well, how do I balance this in my head? I have, I believe in Bitcoin and I don't care too much about shitcoins, but my friends care and I have to sympathize with them. And so then in order to make all of this make sense and kind of sum out in their heads, somebody has to take the negative side and it becomes maximalist. So you end up seeing these Twitter threads where it's like, Bitcoin maximalists are so mean because they call everybody scammers and everybody shitcoiners, and they don't appreciate the technology. But at the same time, they don't appreciate the technology either. They're not working on Ethereum. They're not, investing in Ethereum. So I really think the reason isn't that Bitcoin maximalists are ignorant or evil. It's that Bitcoin maximalists are getting in the way of them being able to like rationalize allowing their friends to remain gullible.
But that's the whole thing. I think the whole part is like, even you, John, you're working on something, you're trying stuff out. It's cool. Like, I don't understand how we got into a point where trying stuff out is so bad, right? Like, try stuff out. I think if you're a Bitcoin maximalist based in like the understanding of what's going on from the tech perspective, you understand like Ethereum is not going to scale for NFTs and all the other things that people are saying. If you start understanding from that perspective and understand how it's going, then that makes the Bitcoin maximalism a little bit different. I think the problem is that we get this mixture of people who have no clue what the heck they're talking about being Bitcoin maximalists, and so it makes it very hard because now it's like people are not seeking to understand what people are trying to work on. It's just like whatever you're working on is awful. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
I feel like it's almost like a rebellion against the appropriation of the culture, right?
Yeah, I think
Versus
so. Yeah, there's two things, right? I think a huge, at least to me, part of the problem is the narrative that a lot of these projects come with to sell their projects that do affinity scam Bitcoin and do confuse consumers. So, I feel like a lot of people, including me, it will call some of these project scams because they are affinity scamming Bitcoin and they are not delivering what they're claiming to deliver, saying that it's the same as Bitcoin or better. So I feel entitled to go and call them, scammers.
The problem is the scam is extremely insidious because as soon as you own some, you become a proponent. And so maybe I see no issue with trying things. That's not what Bitcoin maximalists say. They don't say don't try things. They say
Yes, they do.
they say don't be a scammer and don't believe in scams. Now, trying something, if I install an Ethereum node because I want to see how it works and see how it's different than Bitcoin, that doesn't make me a shitcoiner and it doesn't make me a scammer. But if I go on Twitter and I say, this token is awesome, or I love NFTs, buy my NFT, that is not playing with things and experimenting. That is trying to participate in
You
the
know,
scam.
Johnny,
Bro,
you're totally correct on that. Hang on, Lamar. Like, look at Zcash, for example, right? I mean, it was a total money grab. Essentially, the network itself sends a huge chunk of the issued assets to the founders and all the investors, right? And it even has a mining tax. I mean, it's literally a money grab, right? Where all the technology could have been created or disseminated in a much more, say, fair issuance or without being pre-mined. All these projects do choose to do pump and dump. And listen, retail is the liquidity exit for a lot of these projects, and that's the problem that Maxes have. Like the the ICO stuff that people now are using this narrative. Oh, it was only during the ICO era. No, it's not true. You look at the projects now; it's no different.
No, but John, if you got on here and said you were running Ethereum node and you said it and you did it, I guarantee some people are gonna say, "Why are you running that Ethereum node, you scammer?" Like that happens a whole lot of times, man.
Well,
Like,
I wouldn't tell people I was doing it unless I had a reason.
come
So,
on, man. But that's what I'm saying. That's
listen, no,
bull, though,
no, come
John.
on, man. Look,
Like, why do you have
James,
to run? Why
look,
would you run from it?
I wouldn't run from it. I would, if I were doing it, it would be for a reason, and I would be able to communicate that reason. I'm not somebody hiding things from people. My point is, for example, Jameson Lopp does research to show how poorly Ethereum nodes runs, and so he regularly runs them and tries to sync them up to the current state of the chain, and shows how hard it is, and how badly this scales, and how impossible the task actually is. And then, so he does it as a researcher to contrast it to Bitcoin.
Well,
He's
John,
not a
what if he came
Bitcoiner
out?
and he's not a scammer.
What if his research? But what if his research turned around and said, "Oh, Ethereum's amazing," or whatever he's running is amazing, and he came out and said that? Do you realize that
He probably would. He
there's a whole
probably
function
would.
there's a whole function of people. There was a whole group of people that would turn on him immediately. And they'll be like,
What?
come on, bro. They'll be like, come on, Jameson, you're supposed to be a Bitcoin guy. What are you doing? And Jameson's like, I just did the research and this is what it did. And we know that's not gonna happen. We know Ethereum sucks. But what I'm saying is that if that were to be the case, we have some people who don't have enough knowledge
But this
that
is
literally would attack
ridiculous,
him for
Lamar.
research.
This is ridiculous. You're saying, what about in a reality that wouldn't actually be possible? What if it were possible and somebody were acting against that
John, but
reality?
see, but
Like,
that's the problem. The problem is it's not
Maybe
ridiculous at all.
Lamar.
Because something else hold on. Something else could come up, right? Somebody could come up with some other protocol that works really well. Jameson starts researching, it says it's good. From that point, guess what's gonna happen? Like
He would say
people would turn on him.
publicly. I'm pretty sure.
He would, I
Sure
know, he would,
Jameson
but
would.
people would attack him.
But hang on a second, Lamar. Since when do people should care about what other people think? Like, I
I
mean,
know
seriously,
exactly. That's what I'm saying.
but hang on a second. If all the shitcoiners, okay, were so confident about them not being scammers, why do they care? The
But
problem
that's
is
what I'm
every
saying.
single time, everybody goes around and finds that they were scamming, right? I mean,
Well,
at
I
the
think a
end of the
lot of the
day,
concern is starting to be like there's, and I think I get this from like the more technical people. They're starting to worry that Bitcoin maximalism like misrepresents the technical reality of what is happening, and then now they're trying to sort of distance themselves from the term in an attempt to counteract that. And that's how I read Corrales' tweet. And I think this is a lot of what Udi's been doing is kind of a similar thing, right? I think what they're saying is that Bitcoin maximalism, while aspirationally and directionally correct, is not 100% scientifically accurate. That's their claim. I think they have to be making it, otherwise they wouldn't have developed the aversion to the term. And I think that is what you're seeing people broadcast publicly is like they're worried about that particular thing. Like even having this conversation right now, where we're having a conversation about criticisms and sort of different things. We're talking about the Ethereum node. Like all of this kind of wraps together into that, right? And so I think they're rebelling more against the culture than anything else.
you know,
No, they're just worried about looking anti-intellectual because it feels
Right.
anti-intellectual to reject this stuff, but it is actually extremely rational. Like so far, there has been no blockchain or shitcoin that has ever actually, defeated Bitcoin or operated or done Bitcoin's job more efficiently than Bitcoin has. And as long as that remains true, there's not even a chance of Bitcoin being unseated. Now, this is what they want. They want to know, so you're saying there's a chance. They want the meme, and that's all they want. They want you to believe in the chance because then you can believe in buying their bags. And that's the main motivation. It's a very insidious underlying motivation where they're
Well, I mean,
saying,
you started
I
with
need
something
these
I
people
agree
to
with,
believe
where it's
that this
like
is possible.
anti-intellectual. But then I think, like, and this was my criticism of what Udi was saying. I said, Udi, I think it's one thing, like, you're just building a sentiment around this idea that like tokens aren't all bad, but like you're not providing any specificity with the example. You're not talking like generally like why they should be considered good. You're just sort of banging a drum, and the drum right now is on one side you have the Bitcoin maximalists, Bitcoin maximalists saying everything is scams. On the other side, you're having people sort of bang a drum and galvanize around. Well, some tokens are good, and then there's no clarity in between, right? It's just there's two sentiment signals on either side. Both of them are somewhat
John,
useless.
All right,
John, that's
there are
why I
two.
came
hang
out.
on.
John,
There are
that's why
two
the
huge
first.
problems with
John,
this
real quick.
argument.
John, real
Let me.
quick, just real quick. I said that's why I said at the very beginning what you said. Like I think Bitcoin maximalism has to be rooted in the fact that people understand that the reason why people are Bitcoin maximalists, like myself, is because we tried things and we know that there's nothing better out there. There hasn't been anything, nothing else has been presented that can actually do anything with Bitcoin at all, right? And I
I
think
don't need to burn
that's
my
the
hand
root.
on the stove to know that it's hot.
But you know what's
Some
interesting?
people,
Traditionally, when you have somebody come up with like a project or something, right? And a lot of people go and call them a scammer, you'd have libel laws and people sue each other and sort out in court. But because in this new world now that nobody wants regulation, including me, uh, and a lot of the people calling other people scams, whatever names, very hard to sue them too. You arrive at a place now where reputation is king, right? And a lot of these people coming up with these new coins and these things, they already have bad reputations to begin with, so they are being called scammers. There's a lot of egos hurt, right? And when there is egos hurt, people love to create new narratives around to try to fix it. I mean, this is like PR 101, right? So you look at the what is it, the dot BTC thing? I forgot the name of that project.
That
These are, yeah, that's one of the main projects right now, partnering up with Udi and trying to sort of like create some sort of like straw man around maxis because they're trying to scam. It's a legal scam, right? They're even a security, the STO thing, but it's obviously something that's going to get dumped on retail. So they are trying to create all these strawmans. At the end of the day, like a lot of the stuff is just strawmans. Sure, there's a lot of rude people, but who cares?
All right, so two perspectives here, starting with one perspective and then unfolding into two, which is first, one problem why they're all scams and why we're comfortable saying this is that no blockchain can be created as what's the word, ephemerally or without a head, without a leader, like the way Bitcoin was. It somehow managed to sneak under the radar and get issued and get distributed and get created without it being owned by one and controlled by one central party. That's not possible anymore. So every single shitcoin that comes after Bitcoin, every blockchain that comes after, is generated by one individual or one entity, or maybe at best or managed by a federation of entities, but still ultimately coming from one source for the most part, which means it's ultimately censorable, controlled, not distributed, has all the problems of bootstrapping a blockchain, and thus it can't really compete with Bitcoin. But further, against the anti-intellectual argument and this insidious idea that, you have to entertain the idea that maybe one could innovate on Bitcoin. The problem with this argument is that you have two parts. One, which is, in order to actually beat Bitcoin or be better than it, you have to overcome the proof of work problem, which is how Bitcoin has the most proof of work. And if you start trying to imagine that you can have multiple blockchains that are safe, then you don't understand proof of work. Basically, all blockchains will eventually be attackable by the larger blockchains. And so at scale, you can't have multiple ones because it becomes extremely risky to be able to have a high value blockchain that can be attacked by the other miners of the other blockchain. And thus the incentives are all fucked up. But even more importantly, people think that oh, well, you can't be anti-intellectual in the technology sense because somebody could literally invent a better Bitcoin. Bitcoin didn't
Well,
exist
that's the
one
false
day.
source argument.
Hold
Is
on,
there's
let me
no
finish.
limit. There's no limit on
I'm
further
gonna pass.
invention.
There was no Bitcoin before, and it was invented. So you allowed for that, and you believe in Bitcoin. Why can't you believe that there's something that we don't know today that will be invented? Well, here's the problem. The way to invent a better Bitcoin by the designs of what blockchain does is to make a simpler, lighter, more streamlined Bitcoin. And the people who care about that kind of thing work on Bitcoin, streamlining it and making it more efficient and optimized. That's what they do. They already see that it's already the best one, and then they work to make it better. If somebody were to innovate, it's going to come from within Bitcoin. The people who innovate on shitcoins, they have their incentives all fucked up, so they innovate by adding complexity, which makes it more easy to censor, harder to scale, etc. And so you have more problems with being able to actually apply the blockchain design when you create new blockchains, because now you're always adding complexity. Nobody is ever proposing a new blockchain that is simpler than Bitcoin because nobody can figure out a better design than Satoshi did. And the people that would and are interested in that kind of thing, they work on Bitcoin. And so you can see where incentives lie just by the inherent decision making. People are either ignorant and thus being scammed, or savvy and scamming other people with narratives. Otherwise, they would be working on or owning Bitcoin.
Dang. Interesting thoughts, man. Yeah, that was a nice mic drop there. I can only agree with the anti-intellectual statement and just say, like, I think that you're onto something there. But I almost wonder, if there was a definition of Bitcoin maximalism, would anyone even still agree, right? How much of this is just like the definitional argument of there's no way to kind of corral like sort of a centralized idea, what this is, and just
Well, they just try to, like essentially any person who's a dick on the internet complaining about their scams is a maxi, right? Anybody who's not as rough on them or is friendlier to them is not a maxi. It's just Vitalik invented that term as a means to group a bunch of people together and try to strawman them.
Right. But now I think it's like a new generation has tried to reclaim it, right? And I think ultimately people find value in there being a Bitcoin maximalist view because otherwise, it wouldn't be something that is attacked now, right? I mean, obviously it's still relevant to the
Well, I
conversation.
mean, people like Adidas t-shirts, right? It's like if
Yeah,
people want to
so
just to brand themselves.
Well, my point is like how would you describe being Bitcoin only without using the term Bitcoin maximalist, right? Like it actually describes what we are trying to achieve to some degree, which is we're trying to extend and I don't know, like further the system, and
That's
oppose
why
other systems. I mean, how else do you describe that? That there needs to be some sort of word that describes that
No,
viewpoint.
why does it matter though, Rizzo? Like that's the question. Like, why does it matter? Like, why do we need to put a label and be like, oh, Bitcoin maximalist? Da, da, da. It's like, to me, that's so crazy. It's like it's
Because
a
you're
weird
sending a
world. It's
signal
like
to the market that is like crowded with noise, right? Like there's all
no,
these
but it's
other
no, but it's
factors.
not. But it's not though, man. Because to me, it's
I
like
don't
an
know, but
extreme.
is what I described
It's like
sound
being.
crazy?
It's like
Like
being.
that's
It's
why
like
I
being what?
explained. Like
It's
I
like being
explained it
Westboro.
in
But
a
hold on,
simple
John.
way.
John, hold on, bro. Let me finish. Let me land, bro. I'm saying it's like being Westboro Baptist Church, or it's like being like the extremist Islam, or like it's like why do you have to put a name on it? Like, bro, that's the whole point about Bitcoin.
What do
Is
you
You
want
know,
me to
that
Lamar,
call
that's
what
a
I just
perfect
explained to you?
example. Listen, religions
like why
have
we
killed
gotta have
each
a name?
other over. No, no, hang on a second, guys. Like, religion has killed countless amounts of people over the term, right? I mean, like, just look at Christianism and like try to figure out like which one is the true Christianism. Right? Like, I mean, this is normal. This is normal human behavior in a new market of ideas, trying to sort out noise from signal, right? And having strong public conviction and branding and all this stuff is part of the market signals, right? People also have their bags on it and they want to push their own bags. This is just normal, and it's going to be like that. Like, this stuff is actually even going to get worse. I mean, as the shitcoin market grows and more scammers come in, and we have 8 billion people in the world that's going to join this thing, is only going to get even rougher until 100 200 years from now, where it becomes obvious that Bitcoin is great, and that's it. Like, things start to sort of die down a bit, and people kill each other a little bit less over the idea, right? It's just standard human way of discovering new things.
Right. So to put it more, clinically, I'll say it's two aspects: physics and biology. So from a physical standpoint, I explained to you basically these dynamics at play where, if people wanted a better Bitcoin, they'd be working on Bitcoin. If they were shilling a shitcoin, they were adding complexity, etc. These are physical concerns as to what makes a blockchain scalable and thus uncensorable, and thus the whole point of having one. But as a mental model, everything that I explained in my prior rant requires a pattern. It is a pattern of thought. It is a mental model. And this is the way biologically the human brain works, is we basically observe and we take signals from reality and we form patterns out of them, and patterns and patterns of patterns of patterns. And this is how we are able to basically move and operate within reality, is by establishing patterns and trusting that those patterns will remain true the next time we deal with that situation. And so when we put Bitcoin maximalism as a name on this mental model, on this pattern, we are basically using it as a device to say, when I say this, I am referring to all of these mental models and patterns. Now, as a devil's advocate, I will offer you this. I will say, I am not a fan of Bitcoin maximalism just being brutally team Bitcoin, because that's no different than team shitcoin. If it's like, my shitcoin is the best shitcoin, is not an intelligent and rational argument. It's just saying, I want you to buy my bags, not their bags.
Right, and
That's
that's
not
why I think
useful.
like even like there's an attempt to politicize it and make it like one is sort of like a right wing political thing and left wing political thing is the other crypto side. And even that like normalizes the two views in
You
opposition to
know,
each
And
other.
it's so crazy.
that's why I like the religious frame for all this stuff, because it is a precedent that we know well, and you're going to have a new sort of like paradigm in religion, right? Say, for example, monotheism, and then you're going to have all this different sort of like sects starting to come out, and some are more intense about it. Some of them would have
Yeah, but
very
I mean we're
specific
still within
ways.
the domain of like working in science here. So the problem with the religion thing is again
Well,
it is the same thing
not
with
really.
politics. Like this.
No, Rizzo. Like, I mean, a huge part of this is based in belief and trust, right? Because at the end of the day, you have to have some heuristics, right, around on how you gauge and interact with value and credit, and even Bitcoin's like asset capacity of like existing in 10 years from now, right? There is some belief in this as well, and humans cannot escape belief. Like, I mean, we really can't. We're not robots, right? If you're more technically minded, you can have a better set of heuristics based on that technicality. But reality is, the majority of the people using the asset won't be technical. They will need a set of beliefs, right? That ideally have some precedent for them to create their heuristics on how they use the money and how much they
Well, I
trust
think
that
that's
money.
interesting because I think you hit on something where it's like I think that from the anti-maximalist perspective, it's like they see the system of beliefs and they see it as trying to counteract the utility of other things. I think like if you were to have Udi here to like take his side of the argument, it's essentially like I think he sees it as an anti-intellectual set of beliefs that exists to antagonize the utility of other things. Like that
Well,
has to be
that's
his
not a bad
standpoint.
thing,
Otherwise,
right? That's like guards at the door, right? They see somebody wearing the wrong T-shirt, they don't let them inside the temple. Like these things are not new, right? And they are useful. Are they misused sometimes? Do they overact sometimes? Sure. I mean, nothing is perfect, but you cannot deny that Bitcoin has been defended, especially in the earlier days where it could have been killed, right? By having people who had very strong beliefs and very strong conservatism towards what Bitcoin should look like. And I'm not talking about social conservatism. I'm talking about conservatism over the base layer, right? Like it should have been in a certain way and it should remain the same way. That's how we survived the block wars, right? I mean, and new challenges will come up that will require people having a set of beliefs, right? And being strong beliefs in order to maintain their economic value in that side of the chain, right? You know, you are making a choice based in beliefs. If you're not super technical, which node software do you run? Do you believe the core devs have your best your best interest in mind when they make changes to core, right? I mean, most people, I mean, fuck, almost nobody can review Schnorr, okay, realistically speaking. So you are trusting, having belief that there is many layers of different people who different technical understandings that did sort of like that, right? And maybe you take your heuristics from these people who have had a history of having your interest in mind to go forward. Nobody can know everything. There's always trust. Where we don't have trust is, do Bitcoin have a new kosher block next, right? Because we can prove that there is all this proof of work being put into it, but you're still picking a fork. Every single block you're picking a fork.
Conservatism and skepticism are like naturally part of Bitcoin maximalism and Bitcoin culture because it's actually inherent in the design of Bitcoin. The whole value of Bitcoin is it being difficult to censor and thus hard to change. And so that being a value of the blockchain design and a core value of Bitcoin ends up echoing into the culture and our behaviors. And this is not anti-intellectual. The conservatism is actually very, very practical and pretty much you have no choice. Like Bitcoin is very, very difficult to change. If someone is trying to change it, it is likely they may be an attacker. And so the default to every answer to the Bitcoin question is no. And that's what consensus means. Consensus is just saying no to all change if it doesn't follow the rules. And now, if everybody that wants to come in here and change the rules, essentially shitcoiners and people that are basically egomaniacs and don't really properly value the design of Bitcoin, they will be very open to change and very aggressive about change of Bitcoin, so much so that they may just make shitcoins. But this is like denying the design of blockchain. All Bitcoin maximalism is just respecting and understanding what the design does, what it's for, and how it works within an environment of competitors. And so if you don't understand those things, you will do things like believe in shitcoins or sell shitcoins, create shitcoins, work on shitcoins, glorify shitcoin technology, etc.
All right,
You know,
let me write a sentence. I just want to bounce it off of you, so I just wrote this down. So the justification for crypto is that it's okay to profit on the short-term limitations of Bitcoin. Do we agree on that sentence?
I think that's a
No.
very fair statement.
I'm saying that that's what they believe, right? Like in order to justify crypto, you have to believe that you're profiting on the short-term limitations of Bitcoin.
Or you can be delusional about
you have to justify exploiting ignorance. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it is the liquidity event.
Right, but what I'm saying is like the short-term limitations of Bitcoin, right? So like you're acknowledging that Bitcoin is
no. There's no short-term limitations of
exactly.
Bitcoin. That's not a thing.
Okay, so like why is that particular phrasing like objectionable?
Because you're making it sound like Bitcoin is not something that's supposed
so prior
to
be.
To
there being the Lightning Network, there was a short-term limitation on Bitcoin's usability for payments. Correct or incorrect?
Incorrect.
Well, there was listen, there was a market and there were people using the blockchain a certain way that was filling up blocks, right? And there was a higher cost to use the blockchain that keeps your data safe forever, right? So it's just a market. There was over market demand because some people were willing to pay a lot to do things in a way that was not very optimized.
The risk profile for accepting a zero confirmation transaction on chain, if my true desire is an instant payment, is actually not that much worse, arguably not really worse, than the trust trade-offs and the enforcement of off-chain transactions in a Lightning channel. I still have to manually do things to monitor things in order to ensure that I'm not being double spent. Both are true. Zero conf on chain and Lightning zero confirmation transactions within a channel. There's zero confirmation transactions. You must be diligent to make sure you are not getting scammed. This is how both work. Lightning formalizes a system for doing this and asks nodes in the network to help you enforce this system, but you still ultimately have to do it yourself. So you could always do instant transactions. Now, batching of transactions is something that this transaction compression quality that a channel can provide. First of all, it was possible since a long, long time ago, the first 2 years of Bitcoin or something. That capability, Lightning channels do add that, but they're not exactly a new technology. And it only really works between two peers that have a high frequency of transacting. Now, this concept of the Lightning Network added the ability to basically string these channels together by coordinating and gossiping information about these channels to coordinate longer routes of payments. Now, that is something Lightning Network added, but to date, Lightning Network has not solved anything or made something Bitcoin that it could not do before in any meaningful way, because Bitcoin is not at scale itself. The blocks aren't full. There's still a very low amount, overall, in contrast, of people using Lightning Network, a low amount of volume on Lightning, a low amount of Bitcoin on Lightning. So there's nothing that is like magically a state change, other than that we have a new way of forming transactions that would provide extra utility to people that want to make those types of transactions, that don't want to use the other trade-offs they would have to do them on chain normally. So I just reject the portrayal that Bitcoin is in some sort of short-term deficiency, and that
that's what I'm saying. So like,
somehow
I think
if you don't think there are short-term limitations to Bitcoin, then you are saying that there's no limitations to Bitcoin.
I think Bitcoin was designed.
No, I'm saying the limitations of Bitcoin are the same as the limitations of shitcoins. They're using the same inherent design.
Well, see, the problem, Rizzo, with that narrative is that those other chains that invented these new uses for this technology just haven't broken yet, right? It's just simply not possible to do what they claim to do at scale. So much so that, Ethereum is changing to proof of stake because it can't scale in proof of work.
Basically, the trade-off is we are willing to break the blockchain design in order to be able to purvey ignorance about blockchain, so we can benefit in the short term.
That's right. And I just wanted to add one thing there, something you said before, is that Bitcoin's default design is double span possible before it's confirmed. So anyone trying to do anything before it's confirmed is not your Bitcoin yet, right? So there is no asking the network not to double spend your Bitcoin. That is the default design of the system, and is why it's so costly to have confirmations.
Yeah, I think I was just sort of trying to get to this idea of what's the proper framing of what people within Bitcoin are trying to do, because I feel like there's an inherent rejection of any descriptor that I add to it, right? If I say that the goal of people building on Bitcoin, or again, I've already walked into a terminology that doesn't work. So people are trying to extend the Bitcoin economy, or they're trying to realize Bitcoin's what is the correct verbiage for the activity that is going on then in that case?
Are you just asking again, what is Bitcoin maximalism?
Right. I think essentially, yeah.
I mean, Bitcoin maximalism is one, understanding what makes Bitcoin work, how it works, and what the implications of that are within the environment. And so within all the things we know about the environment, physics, networks, etc., basically physics, and the design of Bitcoin, how do things play out, probabilistically? Now, we could be wrong about Bitcoin maximalism. We likely are to some degree. But
why would you say that?
Well, because we can't predict the future. The future is always uncertain, just in general. And this is maybe that would be the best argument that shitcoiners could just if they were much more abstract and said, well, the future is uncertain, you never know, then I can't argue that. That's true. But if they say the future is uncertain, but my blockchain will be better than your blockchain if I add more cruft inside of it, I can refute that quite easily.
I think maybe the the thing is, Bitcoin maximalism is essentially a thorn in a shitcoiner's foot, right? Like
Right,
it's
and it
essentially
exists to be antagonistic to the crypto
exactly
system. Yeah.
it is multi-form, right? Amorphous sort of
Right, but why is it
system of
what is
antagonism.
the justification for the antagonism then? If
Well,
it's
it's
not to
Gresham's
then,
law. No, it's Gresham's law, right?
It's a
It's
competition.
exactly. It's just
but
listen.
isn't it ultimately the belief that like whatever is occurring in those other systems, you'd be better off of the? It would be better if those things occurred on Bitcoin.
Not
That that
no not if you're
No,
bags, not if you have bags of something else, right? So you know, it's a system of antagonism with skin in the game, right? So it tends to push people to
But what is the
be
reason for
more.
what is the reason that that system exists? Like it has to
Well,
exist
because
for
listen,
something.
people
if you're
people want to
competing with
scam.
somebody, yeah, like, but listen, even if you remove the idea of scamming out, right? It is still a competition, and whoever screams louder may even earn more users too. Even if it's screaming slurs, you might get the people who like slurs. You know, so there is nothing wrong with an out loud competition, right? It's just those guys are scared of competition out loud because, you know, once you start refuting their arguments, you start refuting their bullshit narratives, you start showing that there are actually ultimately
Well, but
scams,
doesn't
right? It
like I
doesn't
mean, if
look
you're
bad
saying
enough.
that, like I mean, if you're scared of competition, then it sounds like the real competition would be what we're talking about. Like Bitcoin loses the narrative wars, it loses, becomes outlawed in the United States. Then Bitcoin has to compete against a state-sponsored
Part of
crypto apparatus, and
part
like
of the
and then
narrative war is screaming out loud.
right. I think I was just trying to say that, like, I mean, you can argue against the environment of competition, but the environment of competition could change radically against the Bitcoin, narrative. Right. And
Well,
that's what Matt
that's
was
why it's
saying,
important
essentially.
to not. This is why the cheerleading Team Bitcoin thing can be, and Bitcoin memes can be dangerous, because if Bitcoin is smaller than Ethereum, that doesn't mean that it's losing. If the reason why Ethereum is bigger is because it is state sponsored, it just means that the amount of people that are either have access to or appreciate the value of Bitcoin is smaller than the amount of people that appreciate the state apparatus. That's already true. Like Bitcoin is not more successful than fiat, right? So Bitcoin is not winning in that sense, right? Maybe one day it will, and that's our hope, and that's what we're all trying to achieve. But it's going to be much less
But
likely to
then,
achieve
yeah.
that if we have
It,
shitcoiners equivocating that somehow things that could be state censored are actually the same or better than things that can't be.
Here's some aspects of Ethereum that are funny and interesting. You know, the biggest smart contracts in Ethereum are wrapped Bitcoin because even the scammers or the let's call it the shitcoiners understand that real sort of store of value can only happen in Bitcoin. So they do wrap Bitcoin because you have this asset that's the only digital asset that does hold value securely is Bitcoin, right? They can't wrap gold paper, they can't wrap Ethereum. I mean, they do wrap Ethereum, but like the values on those are much smaller. And mind you, most of the of the action or like the volume of transfers in Ethereum is essentially wash trading between all these contracts, right? So you know, it's very easy to inflate numbers of use, value, and all these things when it's essentially not grounded in physics, right? Because it's just paper being traded for paper, being traded for paper. I mean, like some of these contracts are like, you know, like leverage on 50 levels of abstractions of other contracts, right? No, so much so that, you know, when there is a small little crash, like these things just pop, right? So, you know, what they're trying to do is just recreate essentially Wall Street by new owners. And you know,
Right,
what
but like
Bitcoin's
part
trying
of
to
it,
do is
I mean,
different.
isn't to some level that being recognized? I mean, it seems like a core part of Udi's argument is essentially that the crypto system has moved away from trying to compete against Bitcoin to trying to compete against the intermediaries that are serving people who are using Bitcoin, and that essentially is what he is saying is the thing that has changed. I mean, that seems to be
I
like a
yeah,
key.
so I would agree with some of that, but the problem is when you go argue with this, like especially on Bitcoin Twitter, you see the arguments that all this the shitcoiners are making is not Udi's argument, they're still trying to say that
Yeah, just
Ethereum is
because
more
something
sound
is
money and all
working
that
now
stuff.
doesn't mean it works, and
Yes.
that's basically what Rudy's arguments are. And that's kind of if that's what Matt means, Peter, then that's the same thing, which is just basically saying, oh, things have changed, guys. The state is allowing for shitcoins, and shitcoins are doing just fine without being decentralized. So I didn't take this into account that the state would allow this. So maybe we need to entertain shitcoins in the paradigm. But this is crazy because first of all, it ignores so many of the other things we talked about, which are more important. But it assumes that these things will not become censored in the future, and that these things won't lead to a future that is the same as the past. You can't have centralized monetary creation without the government running the show and regulating everything. That's just how it will play out. Oh, and I want to mention, it's too bad Lamar's not here for the moment, but I'm glad you brought up wrapped Bitcoin, because wrapped Bitcoin is not wrapped and it's not Bitcoin. And the most popular things being used on Ethereum are all, hey, credit. And
You
so
know, I
wrapped Bitcoin,
agree. It's like it's 50 layers of this stuff, right? Like they're trying to abstract as much as possible to create as much leverage as possible, you know, without having to have any skin in the game. I mean, that's essentially what Three Arrows Capital did.
so like you have wrapped Bitcoins, you have tethers. These are all credits from centralized entities that are backing the entire utility system of shitcoins. Like
Yep.
if people couldn't use credits within these systems, they wouldn't use these systems, and they wouldn't have narratives to pump them, like DeFi, etc., NFT, wash trading NFTs, etc.
Okay. Well, I think that that gets to. Oh, sorry. Was somebody saying something?
No, go ahead.
Well, I think I was just trying to advance the straw man of what their argument is, right? And I think like it sounds like the main point of contention that you're making right now is that there's no guarantee that these systems will continue to exist in the future. So then essentially, I guess we're back to the main question, which is like, is that essentially the point that Bitcoin maximalism is essentially trying to put forward?
Yeah,
Well, it's supposed to be
it's
censorship-resistant money. That was the whole point. Was that it was made because there were governments controlling the money system, and the Satoshi wanted there to be a way to have money that couldn't be controlled. Otherwise, that's the point of blockchain, is that it can't be controlled, that you can't change it at will. Then this is the opposite of what every shitcoiner wants you to be open-minded for change. They want you to stop being conservative. They want you to be imaginative and open-minded and creative, and they want you to think of this as like this magical space where you can play. But that's only because they want to take your money.
I'll add one thing, which is to go back to what Peter was saying about the fact that they're making new innovations. All of us who have been in this space for a while have looked into what these innovations are. We're not new here, and they can't just keep pretending. Most of these people, you know, when they say, oh, well, there's real innovation, they don't even tell you what the real innovation is, because they don't have an actual solid example that they could present you that doesn't devolve after 15 minutes of inspection into obviously a Ponzi, because that's all that there is. Yes, they are recreating some parts of the old fiat financial system, specifically the part where people get fleeced by scumbags who print money out of thin air. That's the part that they're recreating. That's the part where all the innovation is. This is what every shitcoin is. This is what every ICO is. This is what every single one of these innovations is all about. And all of the things that they do is essentially ways of managing a Ponzi scheme where basically you're giving people yield out of nowhere because people are dumb enough to imagine that they can get yield out of nowhere. It's not a new trick. Shitcoiners didn't invent this. It existed for thousands of years and it'll continue to exist. And the idea that you could just tell people, hey, put money, don't do anything, and you're going to get money back. You know, your money is going to just breed more money and you're going to do it and there's no risk. People are always going to fall for this. Shitcoins are just the newest way to do this. And every single one of the major innovations that they put forward as an evidence for the fact that this is not just a Ponzi eventually falls apart. Really, we have 20,000 approximately. We have 20,000 shitcoins. Approximately 20,000 of them have gone to zero practically in Bitcoin terms. Approximately 20,000 of them have lost ground to Bitcoin. Very, very, very small number of tiny exceptions have outperformed Bitcoin, but only to the very, very early buyers, essentially to the pre-miners and to the people who got in very early. So for the vast majority of people who get into shitcoins, all that they get out of it is just basically nothing. They get rug pulled.
I think just to play devil's advocate maybe a little bit, I mean, speaking about like the cultural things people are concerned about, I mean, I think some of what there is a rebellion against is this idea that, making money with no risk has become sort of part of the Bitcoin, how we discuss Bitcoin, right? And I think we saw this at the end of last year where, there was sort of this idea that, things would just keep going up and, there didn't have to be any activity to further the economy in order for that to happen. So I guess, I don't know, how do you square those two things? Is that a part of the culture that we've inherited? Should we try to get rid of that part of the culture? Do you accept that is even a thing that has occurred?
Sorry, I was AFK for 30 seconds. I don't know if you're asking me. If so, please rephrase.
I mean, I think Safe was just trying to put forward an argument saying that there's nothing new that's going on in crypto, right? These are people who are trying to scam. They're making money off scams. They're making money off the incentive imbalance, right? I think obviously that's something we all agree with is part of the proposition of Bitcoin maximalism, right? Bitcoin maximalism has to exist to be antithetical to what is going on here, right? Where there is no incentive imbalance in Bitcoin, right? Essentially, anyone in the system gains equally from the extension of the system, and that is not true of the other cryptocurrency apparatuses. Does that following?
I mean, every dime of value that doesn't go to Bitcoin and is going to some other scam, it's a dollar that or a value unit that we want in Bitcoin. So, as a bag holder, I'll gladly go call them out on their scam.
Well, this is again insidious a bit because I don't think any intelligent person is going to argue that there cannot be advances made in technology as a concept. Of course, there can be advances made in technology and cryptography and networking. We've all witnessed it, right? So we know it's possible to advance things. But to equivocate this and conflate it with shitcoins somehow being the platform for this and shitcoins being the place where this can happen where Bitcoin cannot, well, this is a bit misleading because do I think somebody could invent a technology while doing it on a shitcoin instead of on Bitcoin that could benefit the entire concept? Yeah, probably. You could invent something that you invented. Like the Lightning Network could have been invented on Ethereum instead of Bitcoin, and then Bitcoin could have added a Lightning Network. That certainly could have happened that way. It's a good question to ask why it didn't. But then they conflate this to, well, this blockchain is more complex and offers different features than Bitcoin, so we can make layers on top and technologies on top that Bitcoin simply cannot. And this is why you must respect our shitcoin and thus eventually buy our shitcoin, because Bitcoin just can't do this. Well, here's the problem. The only way that you can suspend this reality and create, again, this simulation is by adding this complexity to the base layer, which creates an inevitable demise of that base layer. Like Ethereum will never work the way it is. Ethereum will never continue without becoming more centralized and more censorable, whereas Bitcoin can. All the risks that we have to take with Bitcoin, we have to be very careful about because we're trying to keep it, the most likely candidate for never being centralized and censored. Whereas shitcoins can throw that value out the window because they start censored, they start centralized, and the whole goal is like to make money for the people that funded its creation. So the incentives are all out of whack. So they can say any of these narratives and fool people, and it's very, very hard to distinguish this nuance that these technologies are only possible on this blockchain because this blockchain is different. All of those things are true, but they're just suspending the problem of, but that means our blockchain will die inevitably. And that's the problem, is I'm not willing to say, oh yes, your technology is great as long as I'm willing to accept the death of it. Like, that's ridiculous.
Sorry, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I was having a little bit of a connection issue there. Sorry, what was your last point?
Yeah, I don't know. I just
you had a nice. I hope you had a nice slam dunk. Sorry about that. Been having a
basically just that shitcoiners make it hard for people to tell the difference between why maximalism matters and why a shitcoin might matter. They make it sound like we don't we're anti-intellectual, or we don't respect the technological advancements there. But the only notable technological advancements there require breaking the blockchain design in the first place.
Well, and the main problem too is like a lot of the discussions are completely um, they're not truthful, right? You try to have these arguments and you get invited to go to these spaces where, you know, they want to debate the stuff. If you get into the technical weeds and explain to them why it breaks, all of a sudden, you know, they'll sort of like come up with some other straw man or be polite and end the spaces. That happens a lot. um, there is no honest conversation about this stuff because they know they're scamming.
How much of this is based on like the ethics of money production argument? I mean, is that essentially? I mean, do we all accept that that's essentially somewhat of the formation of Bitcoin maximalism on some level?
Well, that's a huge part of it because that's kind of like how Bitcoin came to be. But the other issue is they're trying to make promises that are simply technically not possible, and they will come with major consequences to their networks, right? And nobody wants to have those discussions in public or in front of their new liquidity exit.
Right, but they'll have issues with, like, I guess the question though is, you know, at some point, like, how long is short term, right? And how long do these things last? I mean, if they last 80 years, right? If they last 90 years, you know, like, at what point are these arguments just like so long and theoretical that there's just no, you know, like, there's no there's no like lifetime
I
utility
mean,
to the holder of that view. Like, let's
so
just say if Ethereum like lasts until I die, then what's the what's
I-
the
imagine
what's the
Rizzo,
holder of it?
imagine like you have Ethereum in your company's treasuries, and you know it's integral part of your organization, right? And then somebody launches another CryptoKitty app, and all of a sudden you are incapable of making transactions on Ethereum, right? These are not theoretical; they happen all the time. Or they decide that your use of Ethereum is not kosher, right? So they'll go and do a rollback. Or you were expecting to have some schedule issuance or some consistency in the money supply of Ethereum, and all of a sudden they change that. The problem is you are completely at the mercy of a handful of people systems because they are not really decentralized.
Tomer, what's up? Sounds like you just joined.
Hey, yeah, I did just join, and I don't even know how long this spaces has been going on. And this is near and dear issue to my heart, and I love all the work all of you guys do on this. And so, if what I'm about to say, I'm going to try to be really quick, is repetitive, I apologize, and you can just kick me off the stage. But it's the thing that is so important about the whole space is Bitcoin is launched to try to create sound money for everyone in the world, and even if there's two, let alone there's 20,000, even if all these other projects were somehow equally sound, which we know they're not, it would defeat the purpose of money if you had to hold 20,000 different currencies just to be able to engage in commerce with somebody else. And you had to have all these exchanges in the middle so that if I wanted to buy something from somebody else, I needed to exchange to the currency he prefers, and then he needed to change to the currency they prefer. Defeats the whole point of money, which is that we all value the same thing for exchange and trade. And so, first and foremost, if there's something wrong with Bitcoin as money, then okay, make that point. But the other thing that all of these coins do is they try to have it do something that money isn't meant to do. Like, money is meant to do nothing with. That's called saving. And then to be sent and received for people exchanging labor and work. It's all these other things that these coins claim to do are things that people and companies do for money, right? So when you try to make the money do these things, it breaks the whole idea. Like, we work for money, not our money does work. And that I think is part of this. Whether people are self-deluded or they're deluding other people, they say, "Oh, look at that money, it doesn't do anything." It's not meant to do anything. It's meant to store value and be able to be exchanged for people who do something. And this is the big confusion for me in terms of what gets out there. And people really fall for the narrative of, oh, this money runs contracts on it. There's so many things that are wrong with it.
Yeah, these are really good points, Tomer. Like, imagine how obnoxious it would be to believe in a world where the reason why people compete and choose different monies is on their features. Like, oh, I own some of this money because I can do this with it, and I own some of
Well,
that
that's why I
money
think
because I
like the
can do
crypto
that with it.
asset narrative is like fundamentally broken, and I think like that hasn't been like talked about enough and like in public. I mean, I think that that has to be like true at this point. Like, yeah, I don't know if you guys remember like the fat
That's
crypto
Well, it's
asset
absurd.
narrative.
Like people don't want to like you said, people don't want to have 20 different monies in their wallet and have to figure out which money is and use and rely on exchanges. This is extremely inefficient. There's mental load. There's just the inefficiency of like the concept of circular economy. The reason why like Bitcoin, a big thing that's associated with Bitcoin maximalism is this concept of circular economy because conversion is an inefficiency. You don't want a lot of things to convert. And if there were going to be nuance between different ways of value and different storing of money, it wouldn't be on features of monies that were, just ultimately creating more and more endless quantities of them. It would be on like the IOU, on the credit sense. What is the promise of this value? So if there's going to be more monies or more stores of value, I think it will be credits and credit systems because they will have specific representations. Like this money I know I can use to get this outcome, this thing. This is my banana money. This is my rent money, whatever. Like credits can be, in other words, leveraging trust. Bitcoin removes the need for trust. The only alternative is something that leverages trust. And that's it. You don't need anything else.
But that's why Gresham's law seems to always apply, even if it's a modification of its definition. Um, people are smart, even if they are zero IQ. They will spend their shittier forms of money before they spend their good forms of money, right? And there is no escape to this. That's why like money tends toward monopolies, right? We have the USD. You could say it's a forced monopoly, but it's not. I mean, it's just they happen to have the most amount of guns, and people want protection. So the USD tends to be the monopoly, and then they created a bunch of other features through credit for people to use to leverage on it. But my point is the issue with this idea of a plural money system is that you're always gonna bump back into the Gresham's law. People will spend their other shitty money first, and you're gonna actually see more volume and more velocity on shittier forms of money. That's why you see so much trading in these other networks.
Well, I think there's two things that I would add to that. It's one is these things, these new things, Bitcoin and the whole crypto space, are still in the process of being adopted and accepted and understood. One thing is, as far as the definition of money is concerned, that it is unit of account, medium of exchange, store of value. None of these other cryptos are making really any progress with the exception of like the stable coins, Tether, or such, are making any progress in the medium of exchange, right? Like none of them have the Lightning Network, which is growing like crazy. Lynn Alden has an amazing article about Lightning Network, which if you don't mind my plugging, on the Swan blog, which he published on Friday. But it's growing, and Bitcoin is winning at being used as a medium of exchange. There's no Ethereum beach. There's no XRP lake. There's no Cardano jungle. There's Bitcoin beach, Bitcoin lake, Bitcoin jungle. There's El Salvador. There's no other country that's embracing any of these other shit coins as their unit of account, right? Or as their medium of exchange. And this is where all the time and energy that we invested in building Lightning, creating SegWit, all of these things to actually move towards the goal of really being money, not of being this fancy narrative that changes every 3 weeks or every 6 months or however often, but actually doing the thing that we set out to do and taking a long time doing it is actually paying off, if you will, right? We can cash in on it, it's working. And so it's just a matter of time as Bitcoin continues to expand as actual money. And the reason I feel compelled to make points like this is there is so much sophistry going on around with all these fancy stories. And if you just say, well, what do I actually want money to do? I want to be able to spend it somewhere. I want it to be able to save it. And that's, and I want to be able to receive it. And that's what Bitcoin gives to every single human being in the world and keeps getting better at all the time. And it's what none of these other things are trying to do. They're trying to distract from the fact that that's what you want money to do. They're like,
Well, I
oh,
mean, I
look
think a
at
lot of them are also trying to be there. I mean, they're trying to be equities at this point, right? I mean, even
exactly.
if you read sort of the threads and the statements from the crypto sphere, I mean, like they'll even, I think, say that pretty directly. But so then I guess how does
Well,
Bitcoin?
but then they get upset if you dare say that they're an equity, because that means they're a security, and that means you as a Bitcoiner are trying to get them regulated, and that means you're no longer an anarchist or whatever. Like it's out of both sides of the mouth. These things are they're equities that actually don't make the promise of profit share should the equity actually generate profit. They are a different kind of thing because they make so little in the way of actual promises. They're speculative instruments. I'm just going to avoid words that might draw or repel regulators. They're highly speculative instruments that certainly aren't money. And if you attempt to position them as money and then compare them as money to Bitcoin, they fall completely flat. So that's why they try to redirect the narrative, because they're seeking status
Right, but like
against
what happens? So
Bitcoin.
like, let's just imagine like Bitcoin is super successful. What happens to equities within that environment? Like, what happens? Does the Bitcoin system
Well,
accommodate them somehow? Like, I mean,
yeah, I think they don't need to sit. Equities don't need to sit on a blockchain because they are centralized, right? The issuer of the equity retains the right to buy and cancel shares and to issue new shares to raise further capital. That's how a company raises capital if it can't access the debt markets. And the equities are often justified by either claim on the assets or through dividends. And let's say Bitcoin's super successful, then dividends will be paid instead of in US dollars. They'll be paid in Bitcoin. I lost most of my Bitcoin when I joined early by investing in a Bitcoin mining company that wasn't legally instantiated anywhere. It was called ASIC Miner, and it issued
sorry about
shares.
that.
It issued shares, and I bought shares with my Bitcoin, and it paid me weekly dividends on the blockchain in Bitcoin. And then the hash rate increased and the dividends dried up and I lost all my money. But but I learned something about the future, where the future might be, which is you can operate a a company under a Bitcoin standard and take advantage of everything without having to launch a different blockchain, without having to launch a different token. And I think this has been so much of the debate where everybody attempts to rationalize the need for a money to do business with their company. Like, if you want to do business to run smart contracts or to do this or to do that, you need to use a different token. And every company that instantiates issues its own token. And it's like, you don't need Amazon shares to do business with Amazon. It's two different things to be a customer and to be an owner. And again, we get all this equivocation.
Maybe this is a little bit controversial, but like the idea of being able to say, for example, set an amount of shares of my company and have them pay dividends and let people trade those shares of my company outside of the regulated financial system is appealing, right? I mean, that's how ICOs and all that stuff was born. It's just that those companies essentially offered nothing but pump and dumps. Um, I just think that we're not quite there. There's going to be a lot of money losing and a lot of understanding to have to happen still on how these things will play out, and that's some of the allure of the shitcoins is the fact that they provide that functionality, right? With
Well, I'm
very,
kind of
very
amazed by like the literature right now. Like, I mean, I remember asking Udi something, and he sent me this like blog by Hasu about tokens. And I mean, I remember reading it, and I remember the essential argument was like tokens are good at bootstrapping products and services or networks. And
Yeah, but the problem is when you look at I think if the shitcoiners didn't have such like greedy share structures to begin with when this stuff started many years ago, I think they would have not been sort of like immediately classified as scams so early, right? It's just that the people building these things and doing these things, they were so scammy, right? Uh, that sort of everything got lumped in together. And you know what? Like a lot of them just sort of doubled down on this. I mean, the DAX.BTC thing. I mean, you look at the distribution of the pre-mine tokens of that crap or whatever they want to call it. Um, it's offensive. I mean, you'd never have a company or something issued like that. I mean, anyone would see that for what it is, a scam, and would avoid it if there were proper disclosures.
Hasu is a total fucking hack, man. I wouldn't take anything he's ever written seriously. And saying that tokens are great ways to bootstrap networks, that's just saying people like lotteries, people like Ponzi schemes. We already knew that. But when you issue a money with no promise, you are issuing a scam. That's just how it works. Like that you're creating money. That's the evil. And so if you want to issue something, issue a credit on your reputation, where if you don't deliver, you have consequences. That's honest, creation of credit. To get into the subtlety between equity and credit, I would say the reason why I believe in the idea of digital bearer instruments for credit, like say for gift cards and such, is simply a practical one, which is right now governments mostly allow businesses to issue credit, whereas they don't allow them to issue equity in any way that allows an aftermarket. And so all equity markets are extremely regulated, and any participants in those markets typically have to be identified and KYC'd. Whereas you don't typically have to be identified in KYC in order to have credit with a business and in order to buy gift cards, for example, unless you're doing them at a high volume. And so there's an unregulated market there, mostly unregulated, that is sanctioned and allowed. And so I figure this is a better practical method, because I just think markets need credit in general. Markets probably also need equity in general, and the ability for others to own rights to equity outside of the company. And so I think the equity use case makes sense for a bearer instrument, and to be able to trade it in an aftermarket without the issuer's permission and without the government's permission. The problem is every central issuer is ultimately regulatable, because they're identifiable and in the physical world somewhere. And so if the government says it is illegal to allow aftermarket equities and have digital bearer instruments equities, and you do it, you're going to go to jail, and all the equities will be worthless, or people will end up having to KYC to redeem them and get in trouble or something. So I
John,
figure doing it as credit, like something like gift cards, is a little more practical and likely possible.
let me just add something to that. And the main issue with equities in the digital sort of decentralized helm is that equities, ownership of shares, that's what equities are only enforceable by the boot, right? You can't enforce any of the stuff in the cyberspace, right? So say for example, I issue some shares of my pseudo decentralized company, right? You cannot enforce that, especially if the entity itself is not in a jurisdiction where you can put the founders in jail if they don't respect your ownership of that share. And this is why you can't have real estate in the blockchain. You can't have any of the scrap that requires real world enforcement of ownership by the boot. At the end of the
So
day,
NVK,
yeah.
this was an interesting, like this, the argument against what you're saying, which was proven false very early on in the history of Ethereum, was this notion, well, we could have decentralized autonomous organizations that actually do pay the dividends out, and that they are controlled, and that there's some governance structure. But we've seen that, one, businesses, like there could be flaws in the code. Businesses need to change, so that there needs to be some governance model that changes what it is, even if there is some product initially. And as you're saying, ultimately it comes down to the real world, where you cannot control the real world through this thing. So this notion of DAOs takes us right back to this, well, the map is not the territory, when the map is something in the real world. And
I think where what's oh, sorry, you got cut off there.
No, it's okay, you go ahead.
So I think I think the interesting thing here that like we can sort of conclude is that like credit is somewhat enforceable in cyberspace, where ownership is not, right? Unless it's the ownership of a metaphysical asset, right? Like Bitcoin, because
I go
Bitcoin
so
does have
far
the
as to even say
enforceability
that
mechanism.
credit, but I go so far as to say that even credit, like say you're giving gift cards in something, which ultimately becomes, you can issue an unlimited number of gift cards on the blockchain. That doesn't mean you can actually deliver
Yeah,
on the gift.
but you go to jail if you don't deliver them in a properly aggregated
Well, that's
sort of
still
like
violence as a
matter.
consequence, right? It's still violent
Sure,
enforcement.
exactly. So, it's
But
kind of
I want to
interesting.
add some subtlety to this because I don't think that's the only answer. I think it's just the only answer we have today, and it's because of the
Yes.
government's monopoly on violence. But if we had a rich web of trust reputation system that we were all managing, relatively within our own weightings, we would be able to have consequences that were nonviolent. And for example, like if I issued a bunch of credit and I was unable to redeem it, then the people that were involved could basically have negative ratings of me, of the people I work with, of the business that would essentially non-violently kill it and hinder our ability to do business and thus sustain ourselves in digital society, at least. And so
But
I think
John, then I can
there
just
can
go
still
and
be
create a new persona.
consequences to your, you can still have reputational consequences for your behavior if the people that are purchasing and taking these commitments, accepting them, are doing their due diligence and participating in a reputation system.
But you look at like Hoskins or like all the serial scammers, right? I mean, there clearly isn't, a market appetite
There's
for.
nowhere I can go to see that these guys are scammers. Like what ends up happening, the biggest information sources about scammers end up being their proponents.
But the incentive set, in all this meta universe of new finance, is for people to be able to whitewash their past to create a new scam, right? Even some of these companies have real founders, right? I mean, you look at like Obelisk is a scamming, like mining company. The founders can just go and spin up a new company and scam again. So I don't think this is going away, like at all. I think it's only going to get bigger. So to me, like the most important part is not to go punish these people, is to find ways and better incentives to create new things where I can have sort of like a more morally like better life and not be worried about my scam and if I'm going to get caught and all this stuff, and let them do their thing. We're going to keep on calling them scams because that's what they are. um, but I don't think there is a magic bullet that's going to solve this, even with some market for identity or for reputation markets or something like that. I don't think it goes away. I think the people who want to scam are just going to band together and do even bigger scams that look even more legit to the average person who has complete asymmetry on information, right?
Hey guys, I gotta check out in a few minutes. Do you want to do last final thoughts? Close it up.
Yeah, I want to get going too. So I'll just say, thanks for having me. Thanks for having us. Bitcoin maximalisms are going to rule the world. I don't care about your fucking shitcoin scams. I'm sorry if it hurts your feelings, but you are either ignorant and being scammed or exploiting somebody's ignorance and scamming people if you believe in shitcoins or if you empathize or equivocate for them. I think we did our best to kind of explain why in a rational way today. Although it was a long conversation, I guess this will be recorded and you can listen to it later. If you want to find more from me, I have a pretty good series of tweets called Good Morning, and you can find those in my Twitter feed. My Twitter handle is Bitcoin Errorlog. Please follow me. I have a company called Synonym, where we are trying to make all the solutions we think would be required in order to have an alternative economy that only is based on Bitcoin as the only blockchain, and trying to solve things like Web3 without using shitcoins and without using extra blockchains. Synonym_2 is the handle there on Twitter, or synonym.to is the website. So please check those things out, and I appreciate your support.
Hey, thanks for having me, Pete. Nice to see you, John. And yeah, fuck scammers.
Alrighty,
Yeah.
appreciate it, and Tomer for the backup there at the end.
See y'all later. Bye bye.